Good afternoon. I will tell you that I spent a lot of time side by side with a lot of our state and local partners before I get started here. I've taught for lots of years, spent a lot of time going out to police departments, sheriff's departments, fire departments, wherever I was welcome, even some places I wasn't welcome. But, there was some of that. There was some of that. This is different. This is far different than anything I've done before. When Jim initially invited me, I was apprehensive about it, and I'll just leave it at that. To listen to the general, a very eloquent man, I'm probably not going to be as eloquent as he was. I'm told that when you put on presentations like this sort, it's always good to start off with a joke. I suck at telling jokes, especially in a forum like this. But hey, sandwich goes into a bar. Bartender says, "Sorry, pal, we don't serve food here." My wife begged me not to tell that joke. And I said, "No, wife, I know better than you. I'm going to tell that joke. So please don't." Years ago, I told that I was a guest speaker at a fire department annual celebration, and I told that. Man, I'll tell you, it was quiet. She begged me, please, not to tell that joke. So I'm telling you that's. But I'm pleased to be here, and I'm honored. He said this is something completely different than anything that I've done before, although I've spent a lot of time with you guys, either on scenes, side by side, teaching, taught a lot of years, taught at major academies. Has anyone been through the National Fire Academy by chance? National Emergency Training Center in Emmitsburg, Maryland? Okay, so you've never been exposed to me. What about the ATF National Academy down in Glencoe? Have I taught anyone down there? Okay, we got to get you guys to some of these academies. You know, we do have some state and local opportunities. Coast Guard? I taught at the Coast Guard Academy for a bit. No, nobody down in Yorktown. Okay, I'm striking out here. Nevertheless, I'm honored to be here. I walked into the ATF Denver office in Colorado, March 1989, where I met my boss for the first time, Joe Patterson. Joe was a guy that everybody would want as a next-door neighbor. He was an old Missouri state trooper and turned to ATF agent. The guy knew more about firearms than anybody I'd ever met. He was an avid hunter, and he was amazing on the qualification range. I don't recall him ever having anything but perfect scores. My first day on at ATF. Joe was like the consummate G-man from the old gangster movies in the 1940s. He carried that look about him that tended to make you feel as though if you didn't do exactly what he said to do, he was going to mush you up. Mush you up? 1940s gangster movie vernacular for kick your ass. I love talking guns and hunting with Joe. Anyway, he held the state and local partners in very high esteem. He had the utmost respect for you guys and the agents that worked for him. He expected to follow his lead. He was fairly relentless on that. One of the best pieces of advice I ever received as an ATF agent came from Joe Patterson. It wasn't long after I had joined the fold, and he sat me down and explained what he expected, specifically as it related to our association, to our state and local partners. While Joe was respectful to other federal agencies' representatives that he dealt with, he clearly had a soft spot in his heart for the state and locals. He also knew that I had previous time before I went into the military with the Sheriff's Department in Georgia. He told me, Always keep in mind that for various reasons, ATF is a small agency and would probably stay that way, primarily due to some of the laws that we enforced. He told me that we combat violent street crime in America, mainly firearms, arsons, and bombings. Do we have any bomb techs here in the house? Okay. Also, everything that was associated to those crimes. He went on to say that ATF was rich in resources and that we had the ability to share those resources with our state and local partners. Whether it was augmenting drug task forces, participating in gang activity, investigations, working with vice squads, participation in arson task forces, or just running with the local bomb squads. Or just going out to the enforcement agencies and teaching. He said it wasn't uncommon for police departments, sheriff's departments, and state agencies to have severe budget constraints. He said that's where we can help. Never forget that ATF can be a great assist agency, but that was up to each individual agent. He wasn't going to hold our hand. He said if you're out of sight, you're probably out of mind, which was absolutely the truth. So get out there, spend some time with these folks, not just on scenes, not just in criminal investigations, but at other times as well. He said, I expect for you to bend over backwards for these people. And if they want the credit, let them take it. Remember, they have mayors, councilmen, county commissioners, state representatives, and governors that they're attempting to please. And if they're successful, and then it may translate to a more helpful budget in the subsequent year. I carried that wonderful advice with me throughout my career, and I applied it wherever and whenever I could. I took it to heart. I was also cognizant of the fact that there were some agencies that didn't like federal agents encroaching on their territory or sniffing around. I ran into some of that as well. I understood it. I was sensitive to that. But when the opportunity arose to work with these folks, I usually made it a concerted effort to ensure that they knew Al Blank, not only the ATF agent, but Al Blank the man. That was important to me. I wanted them to know that, yes, I was an ATF agent, and that's what I did, but it definitely wasn't who I was. So I began my career with ATF in Denver, Colorado, posted duty, and in the latter days of 1991, Joe Patterson would retire, but I would not forget his advice. I'd been with ATF about 6 years, and I was on my first security detail in the United Nations in October of 1995. Assigned to the U.S. Secret Service. 2 months prior, I had submitted my packet to ATF Headquarters Arson and Explosives Division in order that I might be considered for the 2-year Certified Fire Investigator Training Program. This was an intense 2-year program designed and intended to give ATF special agents the skills and the training and experience necessary to become subject matter experts in the field of scene analysis and determination. Do we have any fire investigators in the house? Great, sir. It entailed a great deal of reading, writing, on-the-job training, formulation of research thesis paper prior to being fully certified. And in short, it was a significant undertaking. A lot of agents weren't interested at all in taking on the curriculums, learning to write technical papers running into fire scenes in the middle of the night. Generally, most of them were in the middle of the night. And they simply weren't interested in placing themselves in a position of rendering opinions in court, knowing that said opinions would come under severe scrutiny by defense attorneys. The program was all that and more. And at the time, there were no other programs like it that rivaled it in the country. Sometime between the time the security detail said goodbye to the Prime Minister of Sweden and his entourage, and we met the President of Uganda and his security staff, I was notified by ATF headquarters that I was selected to be part of the new ATF Certified Fire Investigator Training Program class. This was music to my ears because I was about 20 days into this security detail, and I had had it with driving Secret Service Suburbans around Manhattan, watching hallways and doors and standing outside of the residences in the dark. In the next 2 years, I'd become intimately familiar with fire science, fire patterns, building construction, electrical causes, scene safety, evidence processing, scene documentation, fire-related human behavior, fire pattern analysis, origin and cause determination, fire dynamics, explosion dynamics, just to name a few disciplines. However, at the outset of the program, I'd become exposed to the general premise and basic methodology of fire investigation. From day one, we became familiar with the systematic approach. We employed the scientific method to all investigations. While it may sound frightening or sophisticated, it's a simple method of truthfully and objectively compiling factual data without preconceived notions, expectations of bias, or prejudice. Even more simply put, collect and analyze data, develop a hypothesis, test that hypothesis, and then formulate opinion based on reasoning and facts. Cognitive and deductive reasoning play major roles in the final analysis. It's nothing more than applying scientific principles to a problem, utilizing that method to make sense of a chaotic event, fire. This methodical exercise in data collection and analysis occurs on each and every scene. It's designed and intended to bring clarity and closure to a problem at hand. Investigators often reconstruct and they reason with the intent of making sense of a seemingly senseless situation. It's not unlike what you folks do day in and day out, every day, not only at work, but in your personal lives. So, what happens when you experience one of those chaotic events in life or on the job, and you attempt to apply the aforementioned method in an effort to make some sense of the problem or the issue at hand before you? What follows is a series of events that I have personally experienced. Some I attempted to reconcile on my own. In 1980, I was a brand new deputy sheriff in Houston County, Georgia, right out of college. I was out of the police academy for 4 to 6 months. Late one evening, I was directed to a domestic dispute. A woman had called and reported that her husband was acting erratically. Nobody's ever heard this one before. And had made multiple threats. Upon my arrival, I met with my shift sergeant, and we proceeded to interview the wife that had called 911. She went on to tell us that her husband had been, ready for it, consuming alcohol. Shock. And he'd become irate, and a tirade threatened to kill her. Of course, we asked if there were firearms in the residence. Of course there were. We entered the ranch-style home to speak with the husband. As we called out to him, it became apparent that he was in the master bedroom. We spoke with him from a safe distance and eventually made our way to the exterior of the bedroom door. In the course of his continuous rants, it was clear to us that he told us he was going to engage us in a gun battle if we entered the room. The wife had nowhere to go, while he had family in the area, but he insisted he was going nowhere. Never heard that one before, have you? The shift sergeant forced the door open, turned on the bedroom lights. All the while, the gentleman insisted that he would shoot the first officer through the door. With service weapons drawn and trained on the husband, we moved into the room. He said that if we pulled the covers over top of him, that he would shoot the officer that was exposing him. As the shift sergeant pulled the covers off, the man made a very furtive movement. However, he had no weapon. We quickly secured the gentleman. The wife did swear out a warrant for terroristic threats, and as she previously stated that she would. I recall a myriad of thoughts going through my mind. I honestly believed that we were going to be engaged in a gun battle. Perhaps the situation could have been handled differently. It was clear afterwards that the guy wanted for us to shoot him. And I thought, where was I during that block of instruction in the police academy about suicide by police officer? I was a 23-year-old kid. Less than 1 year earlier, I was playing my final college baseball game. What the heck was this guy doing? What if I had guessed wrong? What if my sergeant had guessed wrong? If we would engage this knucklehead, how could I have lived with the rest of myself for the rest of my life? Was law enforcement the career that I should be pursuing? I knew nothing of the scientific approach at that time, and I'm not convinced that it would have helped much. Also, I was not the man then that I would become later. About 8 months later, it was about 3 a.m. one morning when an automatic alarm came in. Myself and another deputy departed the sheriff's department. Barfield's bait and tackle and gun shop was about a 3-minute drive. Upon our arrival, we observed the front door glass appeared to have been broken outwards. When we entered, we noticed some blood on the ground. The smell of gun smoke was really heavy in the business. Gun display cases were smashed. Guns were missing. Individual bullets lay on the floor and on the counters, and an unusual something was located on the ceiling above the staircase, which led up from the basement. Immediately, I thought in my inexperienced 23-year-old brain, the bad guy's armed. I was pretty smart back then. The other deputy and I commenced to clearing the store, and upon completion, the owner, Mr. Barfield, yelled to us through the broken glass in the front. He led us around back of the business, and he escorted us through the basement door. He just showed us where the break-in had occurred and explained how he had engaged the robber as he had hurriedly ascended the stairs leading up to the shop, which tended to believe that something that was attached itself onto the ceiling above the staircase. As Mr. Barfield guided us through the cluttered basement to the staircase, he had collapsed in front of us. He had fallen face down on a glass bottle, which cut his mouth severely. It seemed obvious that Mr. Barfield was having a heart attack. My partner began to attempt to raise dispatch as I proceeded first aid and CPR. I had been certified in CPR and first aid at the police academy just months before. Now, Mr. Barfield was a heavy smoker. And remember, he had torn his mouth rather severely. I did my best to ensure a good seal between his mouth and mine, and incidentally, we didn't use barriers back then. Between breaths, compressions, and keeping my mouth clear of blood that he was coughing up, I'd attempt to keep his airway as clear as possible. The EMTs arrived in what seemed to be an eternity, and they took over the rescue operation. Unfortunately, the massive heart attack was not survived. This didn't make sense. After all, I was certified in police academy in first aid and CPR. I did everything by the book: neck extensions, clear the airways best I could, breaths, compressions. Mr. Barfield should have survived, right? That's what I thought. I was deeply troubled by this, and when I arrived at the autopsy, the discerning medical examiner must have gleaned this from my demeanor. He was a kind and he was a decent gentleman who took the time to explain why Mr. Barfield could not have survived. despite my best efforts, as he identified for me the heavily affected smoker's lungs, the heart which indicated signs of a previous cardiac episode, and he even showed me the heavily clogged arteries. Well, I'll tell you, I felt less responsible in Mr. Barfield's death, but no less impacted by the horrible experience. I was a good guy. I was in the right place at the right time, trying to do the right thing, so what gives? At 23 years old, I testified in my first felony case. I remember being thankful during the cross-examination that the defense attorney didn't belabor the point that Mr. Barfield didn't survive, despite my efforts to revive him. His client, however, was found guilty of felony murder. Yes, I thought to myself there was some justice, but what about for Mr. Barfield? What about Mr. Barfield's family? It didn't seem right, but I was not yet to become the man that I would become. In November of 1982, I signed on to the U.S. Army after having been selected to attend U.S. Army Aviation School at Fort Rucker, Alabama. Do we have any helicopter pilots in there who went through Army? My first assignment as an aero scout out of flight school was at Alpha Company 503rd Aviation Battalion in Hanau, West Germany. It's a unit within the 3rd Armored Division. Great place to learn to be a pilot because the weather typically sucked in Germany. I learned to apply airmanship and land navigation, common sense principles to routine and tactical circumstances. Upon reassignment stateside, I made an interim stop back to Fort Rucker, where I went through the AH-1 Cobra transition. At this point, I became a snake driver. As an editorial note, if you're an Army helicopter pilot engaged in aerial gunnery, there's no place better to be than the attack helicopter. Following the Cobra transition, I was reassigned to Fort Carson, Colorado, 4th Infantry Division. And I began operating out of Butts Army Airfield, elevation 5,874 feet. Every time I turned around, our unit was deployed to the National Training Center in the Mojave Desert in California. After 14 months and 3 deployments to the NTC in the Mojave Desert, the Department of Army put me on notice for reassignment to Korea. I explained that I had just returned from overseas. They were unimpressed by my objection and said that they had a worldwide shortage of Cobra pilots. I suggested that they make more Cobra pilots. I remember them complimenting me on my wonderful recommendation, but in the meantime, I was to prepare for my reassignment to Korea. I liked the idea of my reassignment to Korea so much that I celebrated by taking the Treasury Enforcement Agent exam. Now, the results of those exams have escaped me now, but I did pass. And I was invited to an interview at the ATF field office in Denver, Colorado. My initial screening interview went well, and I was invited back to a formal interview. And I was interviewed by the special agent in charge of San Francisco, a former Marine, the resident agent in charge of Denver, Joe Patterson, a former Army MP, and the resident agent of Denver 2 field office, a former Marine. The interview went well, and 2 weeks later, I was offered a position. You probably can't see that too terribly well, but this is Teller County, Colorado. In 1994, 5 years on the job with ATF, I was dispatched with along with a contingent of agents to Teller County. Teller County is a neighboring county west of El Paso County. Colorado Springs is located in El Paso County. The Woodland Park area boasts a multitude of mountain getaway homes. Generally, most are unoccupied during the weekdays. It seemed that one such home had caught fire and sustained extensive damage. Typically, ATF POAs, plain old agents, would not be called to such an incident. However, the Teller County Sheriff's Department had detailed a deputy to secure the scene until a subject matter expert a fire investigator, could respond and process the scene. That night, an unknown person approached the deputy as he was securing the scene, as he sat in his vehicle, and the assailant shot the officer in the head. The next day, ATF Denver was contacted and asked to assist on the fire scene, as well as the search for the assailant. Several agents, including myself, arrived at the scene and immediately rallied to a nearby unoccupied home, at least on the outside of the home. Two other agents beside myself would remain in and around that property while the larger group began screening nearby properties and homes. The staging home was a typical property in the area, and it possessed a large deck that looked onto a spectacular valley. We would spend a good deal of time on that deck, as it was within eye shot of the fire scene. We awaited the ATF CFI inbound from Kansas City, Missouri. Later that same day, we rallied all personnel assets to the fire scene along with the recently arrived ATF CFI. We re-examined the incident and what had been accomplished to that point. When it came to the issue of clearing nearby property, someone asked if the property next door, where we had been at, had been cleared. No one answered. Quick-thinking agents suggested a hasty check before we returned to that staging property. In doing so, it was noted that a pane of glass had been broken out of the front door. A concerned question went out to those persons present. Did anyone break the glass? When no one took responsibility, a decision was made to gear up, clear the house. As two agents and a deputy began through the front door, a gunshot rang out. One gunshot, one only. The group quickly ascended the stairs and then went back to the bedroom overlooking that deck. There they would find a man laying on the bed. He had sustained a gunshot to the head, the result of a suicide. The suspect victim had written a rather long suicide note. In the note, he explained how he had set the fire next door and lay in wait until law enforcement came. He boasted about how he, at night, quietly approached the deputy before shooting him. Then he apologized for having killed him. Then he went on to say that he had been watching 3 ATF agents on the deck, just beneath the bedroom window, and how he was considering which one to shoot first. He wrote about pointing the gun at each of us. For some unknown reason, he decided not to kill anybody else. Although myself and the other 2 agents who were there enjoying the great outdoors were quite literally sitting ducks. At that time, my oldest son was 1.5 years old, and my wife was significantly pregnant with our daughter. I remember thinking, was it your ignorance, your complacency, your state of mind that led you to be in that situation? What if the guy had opened up on us? Would he have killed us? 1, 2, all of us? I couldn't reconcile it in my mind why a person would set a fire and then wait for law enforcement to arrive and sneak up under the cover of darkness and shoot the officer. And if he was that evil, why didn't he shoot us as well? What if someone else had been hurt because of my ignorance or my complacency? And I could have mitigated that circumstance just by covering the basics, ensuring that property had been cleared prior to using it as a staging area. Now, if we had been granted divine safety on that back deck, why couldn't the same consideration been given that deputy? Were we merely lucky? I don't know. It didn't seem to make any sense to me. I had many sleepless nights that followed that incident. By the end of the 1990s, I had done all the gun cases that I cared to do. Yes, they needed to be filed. However, I became more interested in the whodunit arson and explosives cases. They were a challenge, and I enjoyed those cases. I enjoyed the ones that I had been involved with previously. Colorado, unfortunately, was blessed with a multitude of bombers and arsonists. These cases took a lot of time, a lot of work, and the end result may have been a case that no prosecutor would touch. I had worked some bombings. I had worked on several arson cases. And when they came to trial, one overriding issue seemed to be, that seemed to persist, was the fire scene analysis, the origin and cause determination. You see, it's incumbent upon the fire investigator to conduct a thorough scene analysis and render a valid determination that would bear the scrutiny of a defense cross-examination. That was a bone of contention. I was well aware of the ATF Certified Fire Investigator Program, and I held our subject matter experts in high esteem. I was delighted when I was accepted into the program. I knew that it was a grueling 2-year training program that would require me to dig deep in my recall of science and chemistry, physics, math, and honestly, I hadn't seen a differential equation since my sophomore year in college. And even then, they frightened me. I had begun the program in late 1995, and I completed all the requirements by the beginning of the winter of 1998, shortly after submitting my research thesis paper, which of course was late. During that training period, I became a nocturnal creature, running with the fire investigators from the Denver metro area at night, reading assignments, writing papers, formulating origin and cause determinations, both day and night, paperwork, research, and paperwork. Now, this will come as no shock to many of you, but the guys that didn't see me around the office much began to give me some creative pet names. The Shadow Agent, the Professor, Mr. Third Shift, Agent No Sam, and Night Owl. The pet names were all very brilliant and well thought out. By the end of 1996, I was deeply ensconced in the ATF CFI training program. Oh, there were other couple things that were occupying my time. I began building our dream home on 10 acres in Elkhart County, Colorado. I was the general contractor on that project. And then there was my Colorado National Guard time. As a pilot, I was required to fly the same amount of hours as I was during active duty. So it was much more than just monthly guard drills. And did I mention our third child had been born May of 1995? Suddenly life had become pretty busy. I was in the process of transitioning from special agent to special agent subject matter expert. And time became a prized commodity. While that professional transitioning was taking place, there was something else that was going on. With all that I had on my plate, it caused me to take stock. I knew that I couldn't or shouldn't continue the pace that I had. You see, often valley experiences will tend to drive us towards faith. I had a few walks in the wilderness, but life was good. I was far from disenchanted with life. I had a wonderful young family, a great marriage. I was a big-time federal agent, attack helicopter pilot, living country on 10 acres with a deck that looked out onto the entire front range of the Rocky Mountains. In my mind, I was living the dream. Yet there was a void. There was something that was missing, and I could not deny that. My faith was lacking. I had grown up in a particular religious denomination that was making less and less sense to me. There were enough life issues to be concerned with without worrying about whether or not to follow extra biblical rules of a church. It had become apparent to me that in previous years, I knew about Jesus Christ, but I didn't know Jesus Christ. Suffice to say that I was burdened by this. I had pretty much had it with religion. But I felt the need for a relationship with the God of the universe. So by the waning years of the 1990s, I became pretty good at research, and I thought, why couldn't I use what I learned as a subject matter expert to apply that searching for God? I hadn't spent much time in the Bible in my formative years, although I attended a religious-based school 1st through 9th grade. I needed to know what experienced Christians were saying about God's Word, regardless of denominational affiliation. And so, I read, I studied, I listened to several different preachers. I became an avid listener of Christian radio. I measured up what I was hearing with God's Word. I carried tape series in the vehicle when I traveled, and I traveled a lot. Eventually, I'd begin listening to various ministers on those new fandangle compact discs. That was helpful. I actually began to spend devotional time in God's Word. And I acquired a couple study Bibles, which helped me considerably. In 1996, it became apparent that something would have to give. I couldn't continue to be Al Blank, federal agent by day, and Al Blank, attack helicopter pilot by night and afternoon if I was flying an afternoon sortie. In 1996, I resigned from the Colorado National Guard and I began to take my life back. I thought, you see, ATF CFIs did not exist in New Mexico, and we did not have one in Wyoming. So my territory was a little expansive: New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. Remember, there weren't a host of ATF agents that were willing to take on the 2-year training program. And at the time, there weren't a lot of folks that were promoting this specialty program within ATF. By the late 1990s, my dance card was a bit busy once again. ATF CFIs were required to respond to fire scenes, to teach, take out of bureau training, attend annual ATF CFI recertification training, and accomplish, wait for it, other duties as assigned. I'd been selected to be part of ATF's national response team. My wife was delighted with that because I wasn't traveling enough as it was. Comprised of several ATF personnel possessing various fields of speciality: explosive specialists, CFIs, forensic chemists, fire protection engineers, polygraphers, canine teams, and the like. You guessed it, more travel, saturated schedule, same old, same old. I met Dane Wetzel during one year at CFI training. He was a very cerebral investigator and very experienced ATF CFI. If there was a complex whodunit investigation, Dane needed to be the one on it. He had been very instrumental in bringing the Paul Keller case to a close. This was a serial arsonist investigation in the Seattle-Tacoma area. Dane was and is the consummate fire investigator in the greater Northwest, operating out of the ATF Seattle office. Dane is also a devout Christian and an attorney who had left the legal field to become an ATF agent. Dane was also a member of the ATF National Response Team. Response team activations were common, especially out in the Western team, as we had covered the greatest expanse. I can recall having several peripheral conversations about faith and belief during the evening hours while on NRT callouts and CFI recertifications. Dane was well aware of my beliefs and the denomination that I was affiliated with. And as the conversations grew more frequent, so too did the complexity of his questioning. He seemed to take a great deal of joy watching me squirm. He knew that I enjoyed our verbal engagements, and of course, he was quite comfortable in an adversarial role. I remember asking him if he was quite happy making light of my denomination that I had grown up in. He said he was honestly just curious and wanted to reconcile some of our doctrines in the light of God's Word. Ouch. We were both subject matter experts and could therefore render opinions on the witness stand, but said opinions needed to be substantiated by facts. That's where he had me. He knew it and I did also. Dane had a way of looking across the table, peering over the frames of his glasses with that gotcha expression after he had just asked a tough question. We both knew that there were certain aspects of faith, of our beliefs, that required faith. However, religion needed to be considered in the context of God's Word. I hadn't before or since felt so unprepared to respond to questions in or out of court. In 2001, I departed the Denver field office, and I would oversee ATF's CFI training program for the next 3 years in ATF headquarters in Washington, D.C. While Dane and I continued to speak through the years, he had no idea the impact that he had had. On my last CFI recertification in 2014, I had explained how our previous conversations / cross-examinations prompted me to reevaluate my beliefs and to take seriously my faith journey. The conversation that had ensued was much different. He had no idea of the impact or the part that he had played in that journey. Dane Wetzel had planted a seed. That would be very important. I have a bit of a commercial break. As you probably know, I spent some time with a lot of fire departments. And when I was asked if I go out and make presentations, if I wouldn't mind, it's something about the Girl Scouts. I guess fire departments are having some issues, and they wanted to let you all know to buy Girl Scout cookies. Okay. That's one of my favorite pictures. Oh, my goodness. I love the look on her face. It was a typical spring morning in the Mile High City. I was getting together with Denver fire investigators after they had gotten off a shift. They'd been reminding me that it was my turn to buy breakfast, and my schedule had been a bit busy. They routinely called to mind the fact that the big-time federal investigator didn't have time for his buddies anymore. They knew that simply wasn't true, but they also knew that suggesting such would get under my skin, which of course is why they said it. None of you guys can relate to that, right? I had some things that needed to do that morning, so I was a little bit late for getting to the breakfast. It had taken me a couple of years to convince the lieutenant in charge of the Denver Arson Bureau that I was not what he had experienced with ATF in some years prior. I had known the agents that he had dealt with, and his complaints were valid. I had been on multiple scenes with the Denver Fire Department investigators, and I helped them out considerably on several occasions. But there's always that nagging feeling that I wasn't totally welcome. It wasn't until the late 1990s that their supervisor admitted that he was satisfied with our partnership. And I recall telling me that's good, because I was tired of washing their vehicles and polishing their fire boots. That morning we finished up breakfast when I got a call to meet Jefferson County Sheriff's Department bomb and arson squad down on Wadsworth Boulevard. Wadsworth is just a little bit to the left of Littleton there. Between 9:45 and 10:15 that morning, I said my goodbyes to my buddies at the Denver Fire Department. And off I went southbound to the scene of what appeared to be an incendiary device that was detonated within a backpack. The incident that affected a nearby wood fence and the patterns had suggested that an incendiary mixture had originated from the direction of the remains of this backpack. I knew the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department arson and bomb guys. I knew them well, so there was no concern for territorial battles. I continued to assist that morning, processing and documenting the scene, until I received a call from my boss telling me to drop everything and get to my vehicle. I explained that I had just about 30 more minutes left with the Jefferson County Arson and Bomb Squad. My boss, the resident agent in charge of ATF's Denver and Arson Group, was disinterested in my answer. Then he told me in no uncertain terms that I needed to travel up north, up the street to the Columbine High School, and assist the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department there. He then asked me if I had my bulletproof vest with me. Of course I did. He briefed me on the situation, and I traveled north on Wadsworth, east on Bowles, and then south on Pierce. I arrived at the school within about 5 minutes of being dispatched. Since I was only down the street from the high school, I was the first ATF agent to arrive at Columbine that morning. I was listening to the news accounts as I approached the high school, and my heart sank to my stomach as I heard what was happening. I recognized that the incident that I had just departed from was likely a diversionary tactic by someone or some bodies that were associated with what was going on at the school. As I pulled my vehicle around to the back of the school, I observed multiple backpacks all over the ground. Law enforcement officers had directed students to drop their backpacks and move in the direction given by first responders. My mind was reeling a mile a minute. I had just come from a scene that employed incendiary devices within backpacks. They were timed initiated devices. So the only ones who knew about the devices were myself and the Jefferson County Arson Bomb Squad that was still on scene. Since the main concern by the first responders was potential active shooters, I attempted to direct any personnel away from the backpacks, which was difficult seeing as they were all over the place. What you're looking at is an overview of the Columbine High School. The upper portion of that frame is north. Obviously, the bottom is south. I had moved towards an exterior staircase on the west side of the school, and I couldn't help but notice several windows had been broken or shot out. The arrow indicates what would have been my vantage point as I moved. These are the windows that I'm referring to. On the bottom portion there of the windows, that would be the cafeteria, and the upper portion, the library. The students that had been inside the building had all but been ushered away by first responders, first responding officers. As I approached northbound towards the exterior of the concrete stairs, I noted a lone student that had been killed. As I approached him, I noticed several news helicopters circling, and I looked for an EMT to cover the young boy. I didn't want his mom and dad seeing on the nightly news in this manner. I began to move back southward, back in the parking lot, while the backpacks were. About that time, one of our agents was pulling one of our National Response Team trucks into the parking lot. The yellow box that you see there is where we had a great array of backpacks that were sitting in. The star indicates where I asked the ATF, the driver, to bring our NRT truck and stage it there. So I redirected him to the west, away from the backpacks. And then I attempted to see if there was anything else I could do further. I was approached from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department once again and advised that they believed that the two assailants were dead in the library, but weren't sure if there were any more. I was asked to help with an interior search of the high school for improvised explosive devices, IEDs, as some had already been located. I had explained that I was out with their arson and bomb squad just south of the school, and the diversionary devices that we encountered there were time initiated. As I made my way in the school to search for the IEDs, I happened by the cafeteria and eventually to the library on the second level. All I could think of was the evil, the audacity, the carnage. My mind could not believe what my eyes were seeing. It was surreal. And I thought to myself, hey, buddy boy, you better get a grip on yourself. You may not be as lucky as you were outside of Woodland Park. The Teller County incident, of course, had happened several years prior, but it was one of the first things that came to my mind. Clearly, whoever was responsible for this probably wouldn't go easy. The looks on the first responders' faces as I moved through the school told me that they had been in either the cafeteria or the library. Soon word went out that they needed to locate both Klebold and Harris's vehicles. At about that time, I received a call from my partner, Matt Traver, back in Denver. Matt asked me how it was going. I didn't have an answer for him. I told him it was a horror show, an absolute horror show. He told me that he had teamed up with Jefferson County Bomb Squad, and they were going to serve a warrant on Harris's home. He asked me if I'd prefer to go. I told him that I'd stay put at the school. I located one of the agents from my office, and I told him we needed to locate both Harris and Klebold's car, suggesting that they were likely booby-trapped. We came to find that Klebold's car had already been located, so we moved into the parking lot due south of the school and close to Pierce Road. We were joined by the head of a local bomb squad that we had known for years. It was no time before we had located Harris's car, and sure enough, as we peered through the windows, back of the vehicle, a 20-pound propane tank with associated components and IED. The IED was visible. We immediately began to postulate how to isolate this car from respondents, believing that it was probably booby-trapped. As the other ATF agent and I stood in the front of Harris' vehicle and began to scan the area, we heard the bomb tech yell, "Everyone back," as he proceeded to open the door. I recall turning white and looking at the other agent in utter disbelief. And then we had a serious discussion with the bomb tech regarding IED protocol. We do unusual things under stressful situations. That was very unusual. This was a very experienced bomb tech. And I have no idea why he did that. Suffice to say, I'm tickled to death that I'm here to talk about it. I don't have a good recollection of what happened the remainder of that day on April 20th, 1999. though we convened as an ATF group, and it was determined that we would return early the next morning. I don't remember much about my ride home, other than the horrid images that have kept haunting me mile after mile. I was in disbelief at what I had seen. I hadn't been exposed to anything like that previously, and anything like that since, thank God. I arrived home in the early evening, and I received a call from the National Response Team leader from the Midwest. Told me that they had a big call out in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and they were short of special agent certified fire investigators. He indicated that he had already spoken to my resident in charge, and I was cleared if I felt that I wanted to make the trip. I knew that ATF was going to have plenty of hands at Columbine the next day, and the NRT call out in Green Bay to me was a godsend. I told the NRT team leader that I'd rather go anywhere regardless of the distance, as long as it kept me from having to go back to Columbine High School. He then asked some pointed questions about the incident, though I didn't have a great deal to say. Soon he recognized that. I agreed to be up on the plane the next morning for Green Bay. I didn't go back to Columbine High School until May of 2010, some 11 years later. I had gone back to Colorado to attend my old buddy's wedding. At the time, he lived in Littleton, Colorado, about 10 minutes from the school. On my way to his home, I stopped at Columbine on a Saturday afternoon, and I captured one digital image. The Hope Memorial Library. As I stood there, I couldn't help but recall the kids that had been terrorized, some that had been executed. I remember the looks on the disbelief in the eyes of many first responders. Unfortunately, the horrific images of April 20th, 1999 have indelibly etched themselves into my memory. Folks, I've worked side by side with a number of different agencies through the years, and I've enjoyed that more than I could say. I've taught and trained hundreds of state and local investigators. Excuse me. Okay, I got you. Okay, let me move on. Folks, have you heard the old adage that God helps those who help themselves? This isn't scriptural. I learned that when I came across circumstances like that had no earthly solutions, it became apparent that self-sufficiency was not a good idea. When you've reached the end of your capability, that's where God takes over, if you want him to. Handing yourself over to and your circumstances over to a supernatural God is not science fiction. It's surrender. When I know that conjures up some uncomfortable connotations, when it's considered in the context of a relationship with the Almighty, I'm asking you to please surrender. Consider immersing yourself in the heart and mind of God. Not only did I believe this promise, I claimed it. The images were relentless, and my heart was heavy following my experiences at Columbine. I laid the burden down before the Lord's feet. You can also. When those valley experiences occur, and they will, when you are in the midst of a personal tumultuous storm, you can choose to feed your flesh or to feed your spirit. Folks, I beg you to feed your spirit. Thank you all, and may God bless and keep you safe.